Assalamu alaikum. You are listening to the Professional Muslim Women Podcast, a place for working Muslim women to share their stories, struggles, triumphs, and lessons learned along the way in pursuit of their careers. Being a Muslim woman who wants to advance her career without compromising her faith or values can be challenging. We know these systems were never designed for us, but that doesn't mean we can't be strategic in thriving in them as we advance our careers. In this season of the podcast, we'll continue to bring you inspirational, trailblazing, successful, and fulfilled professional Muslim women to you. We'll be introducing a mentoring segment where we answer your burning career and life goals questions. We'll also be featuring the Taking Up Space course, the foundational career strategy course of our sponsor, the Defiance Academy. Tune in to the Professional Muslim Women Podcast with me, your host, Dr. Qali Hussain, trauma surgeon, wife, mom of 6, CEO, and keynote speaker for deep dives on all things career and life goals. Keep an ear out for the occasional surprise visits from our sister and friend of the show, Dr. Hani Ahmed, hospitalist, mom, and physician leader. On this podcast, we keep it brutally honest and tackle the taboo so you can be better prepared. Get ready to be inspired and learn how you can be strategic in forging your own path as well. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the podcast. It's Qali, and today we're going to be doing our first mentoring moment segment. And in this segment, I'm going to answer a broad question. There's multiple questions that came in regarding the process of becoming a surgeon. I think there were a few questions that were along the lines of what is the process to becoming a pediatric surgeon? What is the process to becoming a trauma surgeon? So I'm going to go through the entire process from, say, college all the way to being a subspecialty surgeon. So after you finish high school, the next step is college. And so one of the first questions that comes up is, do you have to have a specific major? Are you supposed to be a premed? Premed, first of all, is not a major. It's certain requirements that you have to have before you apply to medical school. So that's the first portion. Is premed by itself is not a major. You can be premed, you can be pre-dental, you can be pre-law. All those things mean that you're fulfilling requirements needed to apply to those specialties. Okay. So that's a frequent question that I get is, what if my major isn't premed? Premed is not necessarily a major. Do you have to major in biology? Absolutely not. There are a lot of people that major in the non-sciences. There are a lot of people in the liberal arts field. So I've had people in my class who were music majors. The only sciences they took were requirements for pre-med. There are certain courses that you have to take, but you can be any major you want. Okay. You can be any major you want. And being pre-med doesn't necessarily mean that you only have to take science-based courses or you have to be a biology major before you go to medical school. Okay. So we got that straight. So pre-med doesn't necessarily mean a major. It just means you're taking the courses required to apply to medical school. So when do you decide? When do you have to know that you're going into medicine? And when do you start the process? That usually happens by your junior year, your third year. So a lot of people, it takes them a little bit of time. And sometimes they are a little bit behind the 8 ball because it's their senior year. And that's when they're deciding, okay, I want to go into medicine. But the entire application process, and this is going to be a recurring theme starting from college, even high school. I think high school, you have to start applying your junior year because the entire process of application and interviews and decisions, that takes a year. So your senior year is usually waiting around to find out results. But where I've seen a lot of traps is when people feel like they're behind is because they're waiting until their senior year to decide, now I want to apply to medical school. So now you're going to be taking a gap year in that case. So your third year is when you usually decide, okay, I want to go into medical school. And that's when you start taking the MCATs, looking at applications and things like that. So the first step in becoming a surgeon is you have to go to medical school. So medical school is 4 years. Unless you're in one of those combined programs where it's college and medical school combined, things called early acceptance and things like that. There are very few and far in between, but generally speaking, it is a 4-year program. Okay. So the first couple of years are usually didactics, which is you learn the basic sciences, you learn physiology, you learn pathology, you learn pharmacology, you learn all the ologies, you learn so much information. It's crazy. And so after your first 2 years, then the last 2 years are dedicated to clinical experiences. So this is when you start rotating through the hospitals and you go through the different subspecialties: internal medicine, family medicine, obstetrics and gynecology, surgeries, one of those core rotations, psychiatry, and then the other subspecial and pediatrics. Those are all the basics that you have to take. There are electives that you can take in specialties if you're interested in subspecialties of surgery, anesthesia, things like that. So your first couple of years of medical school, it's really hard to know if you're going to go into any specific specialty. A lot of people come in to medical school thinking they know exactly what it is that they want to do. And then in their experience rotating through the hospitals the last 2 years, they change. I've certainly changed. I came in wanting to be, first, I wanted to do cardiovascular surgery, then I wanted to do vascular surgery, and then I did trauma, and that was and trauma, I get to do everything. I get to do a little bit of vascular, I get to do cardiothoracic stuff. When we have chest injuries, I get to do abdominal stuff. So for me, all the things that I wanted to do, I could do in trauma. So now the first 2 years of medical school, after you finish those 2 years, you now have to take what's called the STEP exams. Okay, these are standardized licensing exams in order for you to graduate and in order for you to apply to residency, you have to take these steps. And so the step one, it's called a USMLE step one, United States Medical Licensing Exam. So you can't get a medical license unless you take these tests. And there's 3 steps. So step one is all the basic knowledge, all the physiology and pharmacology, and all the ologies, all the medical knowledge that you learned the first 2 years, you get tested on in one sitting. It's one of the hardest tests I've ever taken in my whole entire life. I don't remember studying as hard as I did for that test for anything else. I think I studied for like 4 months straight. I studied day and night. And then it's 1 8-hour test. It's hard, but it's high stakes exam. If you do well on your boards, then we'll get to the residency talk. Okay, that's a whole another beast. And so the first 2 years after that, you take your step one, and then you do your clinical rotations. And then between your third and your fourth year, you take your step two. Okay, it's the USMLE step two. And step two tests your clinical skills. So you take a written portion that tests your ability to think about clinical scenarios, and it's a multiple choice question. And then there's a step two skills exam where you do mock exams on patients that are actors, and then you get tested on your ability to clinically evaluate patients and treat them. So that's the step two clinical knowledge, the CK, and then clinical skills is the second part. So after you do that, again, now your third year, you decide what specialty you're going to go into. You don't wait till your senior year, because your senior year is when you wait around to find out where you matched. So your third year, you have to decide, what am I going to go into? And this is where you make the decision. If you want to go into surgery, this is where you apply to a surgical specialty. So the specific questions that were raised were, what if I want to be a trauma surgeon, or what if I want to be a pediatric surgeon? So there are subspecialties within surgery. There are subspecialties that you can go straight into. You can match straight into orthopedics. You can match straight into urology. You can match straight into general surgery. You can match straight into, obstetrics and gynecology, which is considered a surgical subspecialty. You can general surgery, and then trauma. There's fellowship training after that. So after you finish your surgical training, there are subspecialties that require further training, and that further training is called fellowship. So if you hear somebody is fellowship trained, it means that after they've finished their residency after medical school, residencies can range anywhere from 3 years, mostly for internal medicine and family medicine, I believe 3 years. OB-GYN, I believe, is 4 years. General surgery is 5 years. Orthopedics, I think, is 4 or 5 years. So depending on what you do, your residency can range anywhere from 3 to 5, even 7 years. I think neurosurgery is like 7 years. So after you finish that, if you want to further subspecialize, if you want to do pediatric surgery, that's another fellowship training. If you want to do transplant surgery, that's another fellowship training. If you want to do plastics after that, you can go straight into plastics from residency, or if you want to do something specific like hand or something, you do further training in that. And so for trauma, I did a fellowship as well. So right now, one of our requirements is that all trauma and acute care surgeons have fellowship training in critical care. So depending on where you train, you can either do a 1 year training or a 1 year fellowship that is heavily focused on just critical care. Or if you don't have enough operative experience, or if you haven't done enough trauma, you can do a 2 year fellowship where 1 year you do a lot of trauma and operate, and the next year you do critical care training. So things are a little bit evolving around fellowship training and things like that, but that's the general idea. So, how do you go from medical school to residency? Now, this is a huge topic all on its own, but there's a process called matching where you apply to a whole bunch of schools and you interview in as many places as you possibly can. And these places are also interviewing a lot of candidates. And each person submits a rank. Okay. Each applicant submits a rank of where they like to go from one to however many they interviewed at. And then the programs do the same thing. Of all the candidates that they interviewed, they rank them from this is the person we want the most. We're ranking them number one, all the way down to however many people they interviewed. And this all gets put into a computer, and there's an algorithm that matches people to where they liked and the place that liked them. And it's called the match. And so it's very complex and convoluted. There's a lot of issues with it. It's not a perfect model, but that's the model that we have here in the States. And so through that process, you find out where you matched. And it could be anywhere in the country, interviewed in a whole bunch of places. So on match day, it's actually a very huge day for medical students. It's what you've been looking forward to your entire training, and you figure out where did I match. Now, depending on how you do and depending on your scores, there is a possibility that you don't match, that after you have gone through all of that training, you went through college, you took the MCAT, you did all your pre-med courses, you got into medical school, you did all the years of medical school, you did your clinical rotations, you took your step one, you took your step two, you could do all of that and still not match into a residency. I think it's very important that I share this with you guys because I learned about the process while I was doing it. And the fact of the matter is that we now are in a situation where we have more medical students graduating than residency spots available to train them. And so the last few years, I think it's been around 2,000 to 3,000 people that have not matched into a residency program. There's a lot of more people that match, but the chances of not matching into a residency program are real. And the people who don't match are the underrepresented people in medicine. The majority of medical students who don't match into a residency program are Black, Latina, Indigenous, foreigners. Especially if you're an international medical grad, it's really, really hard to match into these programs. Now, that doesn't mean it's impossible. It absolutely does not mean it's impossible, but that is a real factor to consider. So I don't want it to be a surprise for people to go through all this stuff and then say, oh, I didn't know my ability to even practice medicine was based on luck or lottery or whatever. So the match is a real problem. We're trying to figure it out. The government funds these residency spots and there's not enough funding. They haven't increased funding in years, but medical schools keep opening up all over the place and making a lot of money off of these students and producing a lot of medical students who now have no place to train. And if you don't have at least 1 year of residency training, you cannot practice medicine. In order for you to get a medical license, there's another step 3 that you have to take somewhere during your residency to complete the USMLE, the United States Medical Licensing Exam. So before you can get a license, you have to take your step 3 and you have to have 1 year of residency training. Unless you have 1 year of residency training, you cannot practice medicine. Okay. So say you matched into general surgery. So This is where you do 5 intense years of training to be a surgeon. The first year is called your intern year. So everybody's first year is called their intern year. And so your intern year is basically you do everything that you're told. You have everybody's your senior and you're new. And as you advance, you get more responsibilities and you get more, depending on where you're training, you get more opportunities in the operating room. And in their cases that you'll be able to do your first, second years. And then by the third year, depending on where you are, you're doing the majority of the case. And then fourth and fifth year where I trained, we were operating by ourselves. That's becoming rare nowadays. The ability to operate independently as trainees is becoming less and less, but that's something to look into is how much independence do you get during your senior years, your fourth and fifth year or your senior years to operate on your own. And that's one of the reasons where I trained, regardless of all the things that I talk about. I absolutely loved where I trained because by fourth year, we were independent. We were operating on our own. And that's a really, really critical thing for you to have as a surgeon. And so after you finish your general surgery residency, you can go straight into practice and become a bread and butter general surgeon where you do cases like you can do gallbladders, appendectomies, bowel obstructions, breast, you can do colorectal. There are a lot of things that you can do. If you want subspecialty training, there's a host of things you could do. You could do hepatobiliary, you could do minimally invasive surgery where you do laparoscopic and robotic stuff. You could do trauma. You do 1 or 2 years of critical care and trauma fellowship. This is where you decide if you want to do pediatrics. Now, pediatrics is a little bit more competitive. So last I knew, you had to do a lot of research. So during your residency, you had to incorporate research into your residency, which I think you take time between second and third year or third and fourth year, where you do 2 to 3 years of research, publish, and then afterwards you apply to pediatric surgery residency. Pediatrics is one of the more competitive ones, and the training for it, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's 3 years. So this is where you decide, okay, I finished my general surgery residency. I'm going to become a pediatric surgeon. And there was a question that was asked is, do you go from medicine to pediatric surgery or from surgery to pediatric surgery? So pediatric surgery is a subspecialty of surgery. It doesn't go from the medicine side. It comes from surgery. You learn the surgical care of pediatric patients, which is completely different than adults. They have a whole different set of problems that you deal with. And so that is the process of how to become a surgeon here in the States, specifically focusing on trauma and pediatric surgery, since those were the questions that were raised. But it's a very complex process. There are a lot of complexities and it's very expensive. And there are a lot of people that go into it not knowing what it entails. And that's one thing that I would have done differently is I would have found a few more people that were ahead of me to get an idea of what it would be like to practice in this setting or just the process, right? Because it truly felt like, and some of my classmates and I shared this, is it truly felt like we were just all on this wild ride, learning everything by the seat of our pants, because we didn't have anybody in our family or anybody within our community who'd gone through the system and who could tell us. And so I'm glad those questions were raised, but we're in a place right now where we are in information overload. There is so much information out there and available to us that if we just take the steps to look, we'll find plenty of information. There are a lot of Instagram accounts that share the process of what it takes to go into medical school and to get into medical school and how to prepare yourself. There are a lot of things that talk about how to navigate residency. And so take advantage of those resources available because these were not available when we were going through this stuff. But I know the information can be overwhelming. I know it can seem daunting and scary, but just take it one step at a time. Figure out what are the things that I have to do right now to get to the next step. You don't have to have everything figured out right now. As long as you're working on the step that you're on right now, and you're preparing yourself for the next step, you're going to be fine. Okay? You're going to be okay. This is tough. I know it's tough, but it's going to be okay. Thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate you guys for listening, for subscribing to the podcast, and for liking. And please leave comments. We are hoping to grow this platform so we can reach a lot more people and create this community where we provide the resources that we need ourselves. I would love to do more of these mentoring moments segments. So please continue to submit your questions to the link at the moments page. And I will see you guys soon, inshallah. Have a good one. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for tuning in to the Professional Muslim Women Podcast, the place for Muslim women to inspire and be inspired. Please join us on our Facebook group, Professional Muslim Women Podcast, to continue the conversation and connect with Muslim women like you. Thank you to our sponsor, Defiance Academy, and the Taking Up Space course. Be sure to check out the course at the link below. If you have any burning career and life goals questions, or you'd like to suggest topics for us to cover, submit them to the Mentoring Moments segment at the link below. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and drop us a like and a review. We'd love to hear from you. As always, may Allah guide us all on this journey. Stay blessed. Wa alaikum salam.